I've said this many times before, but the 7th generation of Pokemon is one of the best. And that's because there's more to a generation than just the games. I understand that people aren't happy with the hand-holding in Pokemon Sun and Moon, and then Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon not really adding too much more to the table, but I would argue that the Pokemon designs themselves are the most important aspect of any Pokemon generation, and I feel like Generation 7 succeeds massively at this. That I enjoy almost every single new Pokemon design, and it really makes me happy, because outside the weird decisions that you might think Game Freak is making about the new Pokemon games, I feel like Game Freak understands what Pokemon is about. The spirit of Pokemon, the expression of Pokemon is stronger than it's ever been, and I'm really happy with that. I feel more closely connected to Pokemon when I see these new designs, when I see all the new games and all the new things that are happening inside of Pokemon, and that makes me really happy. So that's kind of why I want to use this video to start a discussion about. You know, we're going to look at the past couple of generations of Pokemon and what to expect or what the ideal scenario is for Generation 8. So if you end up enjoying the video, don't forget to leave a like, maybe share with your friends, get them involved in the discussion as well, and comment down below at some point. I'm not saying exactly right now, because maybe your idea of the amount of Pokemon that need to be introduced for Generation 8 will change, but I want to know what you expect, or like what you want to see for new Pokemon designs. Do you think that the smaller amounts that we've seen in Generation 6 and 7 are better than the larger amounts we saw with like Generation 5 or something like that? Or do you think there's some kind of strange balance that can be struck? Because a lot of people, they're just probably going to parrot quality over quantity and stuff like that. But I feel that there is definitely a possibility to do both. That it's not an absolute law that quality and quantity are separate, especially when you have a lot of time and dedication and an incredibly large staff like Game Freak does. So when I was like, yeah, when I was going through Generation 7, I was just like super happy to see all of that. And I wanted to kind of compare it to the other generations of Pokemon as well. Because when you think about Generation 4, 107 Pokemon introduced, however, some of them were also evolutions of existing Pokemon. I feel like this is perfect. This is what Generation 8 needs more than everything. You know, you get a good amount, maybe a bit more. I will say I'm a bit unhappy with the amount of Pokemon we ended up getting for Generation 6 and 7 because I like them so much. I like most of the Pokemon in Generation 6. I like most of the Pokemon in Generation 7, and I just didn't want it to end. Actually, one thing that's weird about Generation 7 to me, and maybe a lot of people will agree, is that it feels like there's less new Pokemon in Generation 7 than Generation 6. Like, if you visualize Generation 6 and you visualize Generation 7 without even, like, thinking about each individual Pokemon, it feels like there were a lot more new Pokemon introduced in Generation 6. Now, I think that's because of the way the legendary Pokemon were done, that we had 4 legendary Pokemon. However, a legendary trio did not exist in the Kalos region. So that's something weird to think about. Also, there was pre-evolutions to the legendary Pokemon. So we got 4 sub-legendaries, or like, you know, the Tapu Pokemon, the trio legendaries, whatever. But then we also got 4 box art legendaries, or restricted, because Cosmog, Cosmoem, and then it also feels like Necrozma doesn't really have a place. Of those 88, 5 of them are mythical. And then we have the Ultra Beasts, which ended up getting even more new Ultra Beasts in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. So the numbers don't really like add up when you start to think about the Pokemon that are in there, because it's like, yeah, Alola was really small when you just think about natural Pokemon representing the region. Now, one thing I was happy about is I like the starter trios. Like, this is one of those times where Pokemon got it right and they made something desirable in all of the starter Pokemon, and I don't really think that's been done as successfully since the original Pokemon games. So this is what I mean. I think that there's been a lot of respect to older Pokemon, especially, you know, being able to get the Kanto starters in Kalos in Pokemon X and Y. That's really cool. Alolan Pokemon, just kind of so much respect is being paid to all the elements of Pokemon that I'm really happy with Game Freak on that. Now, I will say, I feel the Alolan Pokemon do expand a little bit more, so it's not just like that flat 88 number. You add in the Alolan Pokemon, starts to get a little closer to 100 feeling when it comes to generations. Same with Generation 6. Generation 6 had 72 Pokemon, but also 28 new Mega Evolutions introduced in X and Y, and then 20 more new evolutions, or Mega Evolutions, introduced in Pokemon Omega Green Alpha Sapphire. And I feel like it can be argued that these can be treated as new species of Pokemon. Even though it's only a temporary evolution, it does completely change the design, and it is treated as an evolution. It's a mega evolution, but still an evolution, which would count as a new species of Pokemon as well. So I think, like, when you break it down like that, it was new Pokemon introduced in a different way. Instead of going completely Generation 4 and evolving a Pokemon, they're like, well, now we can actually take a 3-stage Pokemon and give it a temporary 4th stage, which would otherwise limit Pokemon like Tyranitar, starter Pokemon like that, and then not be able to give too much new life to these Pokemon. But I still feel like we need to pull a Generation 4 in some kind of regard, you know? I don't want to come up with like too crazy of a number, because when we look at the past parts of Pokemon as well, Hoenn just randomly 135 Pokemon. Wait, Generation 3 was 135 new Pokemon? That's crazy. But then only 100 in Generation 2, and in the Classic 151. Generation 5, absurd numbers right here, guys, 156. So more Pokemon introduced in any other generation with Generation 5. I don't think Game Freak's going to pull that with Generation 8. I think they were pretty confident that Generation 7 was going to perform better. You know, Pokemon Let's Go, Pokemon Go, Pokemon Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. I think they expected it to be a lot better, and you have to think about game design from this multi-year process. You know, you can't change Generation 8 today. You can't change Generation 8 even a year ago. You know, once you get the foundation of that game design set, you just kind of have to commit to it. And I guess new Pokemon can be designed and thrown in. And what I would really like to see is DLC of new Pokemon, you know, kind of really keep changing the idea of what a Pokemon generation is, with how Generation 7 just threw in new Pokemon for multiple games, just like that. You know, they decided that they can get away with that. I really want to see that be a big aspect of Generation 8. So I'd be okay with a lower, less than 100 release if it means that, you know, we'll get 20 new Pokemon next year to just kind of keep Generation 8 afloat. That'd be really cool. But on that, I feel, because Hoenn exists, that around 95 new Generation 8 Pokemon would be pretty good, as long as they don't overload those with legendaries and then make it feel like Generation 7. So no, Generation 7 with like 10 more unique natural Pokemon designs would be pretty good for me, and then another 10 to 15 evolutions of existing Pokemon. So pushing it above 100, but with a lot of familiarity. Or maybe even going further than that, you know, some people, they just, I would not be upset if even 25 existing Pokemon got evolutions. No, we need a Farfetch'd evolution, a Dunsparce evolution. Instead of doing like some crazy mega stuff and adding more overtuned game mechanics in, I feel like we could add that in and still be pretty good. Because the problem with Mega Evolution is, what if I'm a fan of Tyranitar and Houndoom? Well, Mega Houndoom is completely unviable when it comes to competitive, so I don't even get to feel like this Pokemon exists because I choose to use a Pokemon that's going to be better in battle. So it's like, well, yeah, I'm just going to use Mega Aerodactyl because I think it's stronger, but now I don't get to run Houndoom on my team. So if that was a Houndoom evolution, then yeah, you could actually just splash in Houndoom and not have this Mega Evolution risk tied in. I think it is pretty cool that Pokemon like Kangaskhan went from never used to, oh, now it's actually really strong. And then the same thing happened for Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, more Pokemon being added in, also splashing in the fan service. Lucario, Garchomp, they didn't need Mega Evolutions, but they still got it. And I think it was really cool to represent these Pokemon again, but how about without limits? And how about a lot of Pokemon again? No, that's what made Generation 4 so awesome, and I think we just kind of take that to the max with Generation 8 as well. And then Generation, 6, again, I was looking at all the designs. Like, a lot of the Pokemon, I remember. They're memorable. They've grown on me to a degree. Like Barbaracle, I was like, oh, gross, ugly Barnacle, why Game Freak? Now I'm like, I can understand its place in the world. So that's another thing I feel is successful about a Pokemon generation, is where if initially some of the Pokemon come off bad, but then they end up growing on you, like, as much as I hate it, I said I'd never like the Sandcastle Pokemon. The Sandcastle Pokemon is tolerable. There's still some Pokemon I'll never like Crabrawler and Crabominable, but that's just going to come with any Pokemon generation. However, Generation 7 has the least amount of dislike Pokemon to me, same with Generation 6, but Generation 5, again, I said, like, I don't think that there's a quality-quantity argument, but I think it's whenever you commit to that design. That I feel that Generation 5, tons of misses, I dislike most of the Pokemon in the generation, so it feels like these 156 don't really exist that much. I would hate to see something else like this happen. And also, I feel like, let's say we doubled. Let's just say we doubled Generation 7, we had 140 incredibly well-designed Pokemon that I love, well then, there's also, like, fatigue. There's an overload there. So I feel like to kind of make it successful, if you have to add a large amount of Pokemon, you have to have some Pokemon that are going to be less desirable to the majority of people, but I think that that's just a waste. I think that that's not what Pokemon should be about, and that's why, you know, Generation 5 really missed the mark, and then it's like, well, now we have all these things. They don't feel like Pokemon. They don't really represent the spirit of Pokemon or the expression of Pokemon. Yeah, there's like 8 cool ones in the entire generation, but dang, that's pretty crazy, and that's a pretty low ratio for the entirety of a Pokemon generation that introduced more Pokemon than any other games. Also, a lot of competitively overtuned ones that really messed up with competitive. I wasn't having any of that. And I think that's kind of it when, like, breaking it down. So yeah, I want to know if, like, your guys' ideas of how many new Pokemon you would like to see have changed, what you think were the most successful generations, what you think would, how that would all factor in. Do you think Mega Evolutions and Alolan Pokemon do count as extra Pokemon to add in, so it does feel like the region is a little larger? I just think that DLC and then new Pokemon getting existing evolutions, more regional variants would be interesting, but it's like, yeah, what do we do, you know? Like, that's when it could also start getting crazy. So then we have Mega Evolutions, we have Z-moves, we have Alolan Pokemon, we have evolutions of existing Pokemon that aren't quite regional variants and stuff. I think it starts getting out of hand that way. So I think that's why basing it off of Generation 4 would be one of the best things. And then just doing a bit more Pokemon than Generation 6 and 7. Even though, like, let's say Generation 7 was 100, and all 12 of the new Pokemon were just meh designs. I think that's more tolerable, you know, I don't think that feels like as much of a waste, and it does make the region feel better. That also does give the opportunity for people to feel more attached to those Pokemon. I think that Ultra Beasts were a mistake. I think that, you know, their idea was they intentionally wanted to represent some things that aren't Pokemon that can exist in the universe. So it makes sense, again, on point with the lore, but I think missing on the execution like that, because when you intentionally make something that isn't supposed to feel like a Pokemon, just don't. How about you just don't, Game Freak? Because you do over 100 of those, and then we have Generation 5. That's not good. But I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to get into the new Pokemon reveals and stuff like that. Like, when you think about Klefki, I saw Spectral Keyring, I was like, this is going to be my homie. Ended up being my homeboy, so I was happy with that. And I'm excited at the possibility, and I just don't want it to end. Honestly, I feel like we could have gotten away with even more Pokemon reveals before Generation 7, even more news. And if Generation 8 is going to be a larger, crazier production, then I'd be happy to kind of just see Pokemon taken to the max in pretty much the same way. You know, people, they have their opinions, they have, you know, their negativity towards Sun and Moon and Let's Go and stuff like that. But I think as long as the build-up is done, because, like, the hype going into Pokemon Sun and Moon was the most we've ever seen in Pokemon. The excitement, the Pokemon, the reveals, they were all perfect and spot on. So we do that, and the product at the end is better. That's just reason to get excited. So you guys, enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.